My name is Brooke Williams. I'm 26 years old. And at my own baby shower, surrounded by 50 friends, colleagues, and family members who had come to celebrate my first pregnancy, my mother, Dorothy, stood up during the gift opening ceremony and announced she was keeping my baby's $350,000 trust fund for family emergencies because new parents are too emotional and inexperienced to handle this much money responsibly. What she didn't know was that her public theft from her unborn grandchild, delivered while I sat 7 months pregnant in front of everyone I cared about, was about to trigger the most comprehensive legal destruction she could imagine, one that would cost her everything she thought she could steal from my child's future. The trust fund that my mother had just stolen in front of 50 witnesses had been established by my grandmother Eleanor Williams when I graduated from high school, specifically designated for my future children's care, education, and opportunities. Grandmother Eleanor had been a successful businesswoman who understood the importance of generational wealth building, and she wanted to ensure that her great-grandchildren would have advantages she had worked her entire life to provide. "This money is for Brooke's babies," Grandmother Eleanor had explained to the family when she established the trust 8 years ago. "When she becomes a mother, this fund will help her provide the best possible care, education, and opportunities for her children. I want my legacy to create a foundation for the next generation's success." The trust document was clear and specific about its purpose. $350,000 to be released when I became pregnant with my first child, with additional funds available for subsequent children's needs. The money was intended to cover everything from nursery expenses and medical costs to private school tuition and college savings, ensuring that my children would never lack for opportunities or security. My mother, Dorothy, had been appointed as trustee when I turned 18, with the responsibility to manage and protect the funds until they were needed for their designated purpose. For the past 8 years, she had provided regular updates about the trust's growth through careful investments, consistently reassuring me that the money was growing safely for my future family's needs. "Your grandmother would be so proud to see how this trust is building wealth for her great-grandchildren," Dorothy would say during our monthly financial check-ins. "We're looking at over $350,000 now, which will provide incredible opportunities for your babies when the time comes." The knowledge that my future children would have financial security and educational opportunities had been one of the most comforting aspects of planning for motherhood. My husband Marcus and I both worked steady jobs, I as a paralegal at a family law firm and he as a high school teacher, but we lived on modest incomes that wouldn't have allowed for private schools, elaborate nurseries, or comprehensive college savings without the trust fund support. When I became pregnant 6 months ago, Dorothy had seemed genuinely excited about becoming a grandmother and had made several references to how the trust fund would help us provide excellent care for her first grandchild. She had even offered to help with nursery planning and had suggested expensive baby items that would be perfect investments using the trust money. "We can set up the most beautiful nursery with the best furniture and equipment," Dorothy had said during one of our planning conversations. "The trust fund means you won't have to compromise on anything for your baby's comfort and development." The nursery planning had been one of the most enjoyable aspects of my pregnancy preparation. As Marcus and I researched the safest cribs, most educational toys, and highest quality gear that would give our child the best possible start in life. The trust fund made it possible to focus on quality and safety, rather than worrying about costs during this crucial period. But even more important than the immediate expenses was knowing that the trust fund would provide long-term educational opportunities for my child. Private school tuition, tutoring, enrichment activities, and eventually college expenses were all covered by Grandmother Eleanor's generous planning, ensuring that my child would have every advantage in building a successful future. Have you ever felt deeply grateful for a family member's foresight and generosity in planning for your children's futures? That's exactly what I experienced every time I thought about Grandmother Eleanor's trust fund and how it would transform my child's opportunities and life outcomes. The baby shower that Dorothy had offered to host was supposed to be a celebration of my upcoming motherhood and a preview of the beautiful nursery and childhood that the trust fund would help provide. I had been looking forward to sharing my excitement with friends and family while receiving their support during this important transition in my life. Marcus and I had carefully planned the shower guest list to include the people who mattered most to us, my closest friends from college and work, his family members including his wonderful mother Janet and sister Kelly, an extended family who had been supportive throughout my pregnancy. The gathering was intended to be an intimate celebration of our growing family and the love that surrounded our unborn child. "This is going to be such a special day," Dorothy had said while planning the shower details. "I want everyone to see how well prepared you are for motherhood and how blessed this baby will be to have such a loving family." The elegant decorations, carefully planned menu, and thoughtful party games had created exactly the warm, celebratory atmosphere I had hoped for. Friends were sharing parenting advice, co-workers were excitedly discussing my maternity leave plans, and family members were expressing their joy about the newest addition to our family tree. But as the afternoon progressed and we reached the gift-opening ceremony, something in Dorothy's demeanor shifted from celebratory to tense and controlling. She had been making subtle comments about financial responsibility and not spoiling babies that seemed oddly out of place during such a joyful occasion. "Some people think babies need expensive everything, but that's not true," Dorothy had said while I was opening gifts. "The most important thing is love and proper guidance, not throwing money at every little thing." The comments seemed strange given that she had been encouraging elaborate nursery planning and expensive purchases just weeks earlier, but I assumed she was just feeling overwhelmed by the shower preparations and the reality of becoming a grandmother for the first time. When I opened the final gift, and everyone was gathered around sharing in the celebration of my growing family, Dorothy suddenly stood up with an expression that I had never seen before, a mixture of determination and defensiveness that immediately made me uncomfortable. "Before we finish today's celebration, I have an important announcement to make about Brooke's financial planning," Dorothy said, in a voice loud enough to carry throughout the room. "I've been thinking carefully about the baby trust fund that my mother established, and I've decided that it would be irresponsible to release that money to new parents who lack experience managing large sums." The room fell silent as 50 people tried to process what they were hearing. My friends and colleagues looked confused, while Marcus's family members appeared shocked and increasingly uncomfortable with the direction Dorothy's announcement was taking. "I've decided to keep the trust fund for family emergencies rather than allowing it to be wasted on unnecessary baby expenses," Dorothy continued, apparently oblivious to the horrified expressions on everyone's faces. "New parents are too emotional and make impulsive decisions about spending. This money is better managed by someone with experience and perspective." Have you ever experienced a moment of public humiliation so devastating that you couldn't immediately process what was happening? That's exactly what I felt as Dorothy announced her theft of my child's trust fund in front of everyone who had come to celebrate my pregnancy and upcoming motherhood. The shocked silence in the room was broken only by my mother-in-law Janet's audible gasp, and the sound of someone's chair scraping against the floor as they shifted uncomfortably. 50 people were witnessing Dorothy steal my unborn child's financial security, while I sat pregnant and vulnerable, unable to adequately respond to such an unexpected and cruel betrayal. But Dorothy wasn't finished with her devastating announcement that was destroying what should have been one of the most joyful days of my pregnancy. "Babies don't actually need expensive cribs, designer clothes, or fancy toys," Dorothy continued, her voice becoming more confident as she warmed to her justification for stealing my child's trust fund. "What they need is love, attention, and proper guidance from experienced family members who understand financial responsibility." The room remained silent as everyone processed the magnitude of what they were witnessing. A grandmother announcing her intention to steal money specifically designated for her unborn grandchild, while that child's mother sat helplessly in a maternity dress, 7 months pregnant and surrounded by witnesses to her family's betrayal. "This money will be much better used for actual family emergencies rather than being wasted on trendy baby products that will be outgrown in months," Dorothy added, apparently expecting agreement or support from the assembled guests who were actually staring at her in shock and horror. My friend Sarah, who worked as a financial advisor, looked like she was struggling to contain her outrage at what she was hearing. Marcus's sister Kelly had gone pale and was staring at Dorothy with obvious disbelief. The baby shower that was supposed to celebrate my growing family had become a public forum for announcing the theft of my child's inheritance. "Dorothy, that trust fund was specifically established for Brooke's children," my mother-in-law Janet said, her voice carefully controlled but clearly furious. "Your mother's instructions were very clear about its purpose and timing. "Janet, you don't understand the full situation," Dorothy replied dismissively. "Brooke has a good husband who can provide for the baby's needs. This trust money is better preserved for actual emergencies rather than being spent on baby indulgences that aren't necessary." The casual dismissal of my child's educational and developmental needs as indulgences, while simultaneously stealing the money designated for those needs, was both cruel and revealing about Dorothy's true priorities regarding her grandchild's future. But what made the moment even more devastating was Dorothy's next statement, which revealed that her theft wasn't just a decision she was announcing. It was something she had already begun implementing without my knowledge or consent. "I've already made some necessary family investments with part of the trust fund," Dorothy said, as if she was sharing practical financial management rather than admitting to theft. "The kitchen renovation was essential, and the cruise I've booked will provide important rest and perspective for managing family responsibilities." The revelation that Dorothy had already spent $100,000 of my baby's trust fund on home improvements and luxury travel while I was preparing for motherhood hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just decided to steal the money. She had been systematically using it for personal purposes while lying to me about its availability for my child's needs. Have you ever discovered that someone had been spending your child's money on luxury purchases while pretending to protect it for their future? That's exactly what I was learning in front of 50 witnesses who could see the devastation on my face as Dorothy's theft was exposed. The kitchen needed updating, and everyone benefits from having a nice space for family gatherings, Dorothy continued, apparently expecting understanding rather than recognizing the horror of what she was admitting. "And taking a cruise will help me recharge so I can provide better guidance to Brooke during her transition to motherhood." The twisted logic that spending my baby's money on kitchen renovations and luxury vacations would somehow benefit my child was so absurd that several guests were exchanging glances of disbelief and obvious discomfort with witnessing such a family crisis at what was supposed to be a celebration. "Dorothy, that money was designated for your grandchild's education and opportunities." Marcus finally found his voice to respond, his anger barely contained despite the public setting. "You can't just decide to spend it on personal projects and call that family investment." "Marcus, you're young and don't understand how family finances work," Dorothy replied with condescending confidence. "Sometimes decisions need to be made by people with more experience and perspective than new parents can provide." The baby shower that was supposed to celebrate our growing family had become a nightmare of public humiliation and financial betrayal that I knew would be remembered by everyone present as the day Dorothy stole from her unborn grandchild, while his mother sat helplessly watching. But as the shock began to wear off, and I realized the magnitude of what Dorothy had done, I also began to understand that her public admission of theft in front of 50 witnesses had provided exactly the evidence I would need to ensure that her crimes would be prosecuted and my child's money would be recovered. The woman who had announced her theft of my baby's trust fund while I sat pregnant and vulnerable was about to learn that stealing from children carries consequences she had never anticipated, and that my background as a paralegal had given me exactly the legal knowledge necessary to ensure she faced justice for her crimes against my family's future. The immediate aftermath of Dorothy's devastating announcement was marked by an uncomfortable attempt to continue the baby shower as if nothing had happened, but the joy and celebration had been completely destroyed by her public theft of my child's trust fund. Guests were clearly struggling to process what they had witnessed, offering awkward congratulations on gifts, while obviously upset about the family crisis that had unfolded before their eyes. "Brooke, I'm so sorry about what just happened," my college friend Sarah whispered as people began gathering their belongings and making excuses to leave early. "That was completely inappropriate and probably illegal. Have you talked to a lawyer about trust fund management and fiduciary responsibilities?" The support from friends who understood that Dorothy's actions were both cruel and legally problematic was comforting. But what was even more meaningful was seeing the outrage on the faces of Marcus's family members, who were clearly appalled by the way his pregnant wife had been treated during what should have been a celebration. "Brooke, honey, I want you to know that what Dorothy did today was wrong on every level," my mother-in-law Janet said as she hugged me goodbye. "That trust fund was established specifically for your children, and no one has the right to redirect it for personal use, regardless of their excuses or justifications." But perhaps the most telling reaction came from my co-workers at the family law firm, who had attended the shower to support me during my pregnancy, and who immediately recognized the legal implications of what Dorothy had announced in front of multiple witnesses. "Brooke, what your mother described sounds like a clear breach of fiduciary duty and potentially criminal misappropriation of trust assets," my supervising attorney, Lisa Martinez, said quietly as the gathering was ending. "You need to document everything she said today and consider taking immediate legal action to protect your child's interests. The professional validation that Dorothy's actions constituted serious crimes rather than just poor family communication was both encouraging and motivating, since it confirmed that I had legal recourse to recover my child's stolen money and ensure she faced consequences for her betrayal." Over the following days, as I processed the humiliation of having my baby's trust fund stolen during my own shower, I began researching trust law and fiduciary responsibilities to understand exactly what rights my child and I had regarding Dorothy's theft of funds specifically designated for his future. "Mom, I've been reviewing grandmother Eleanor's trust documents, and they're very specific about the money being released when I become pregnant," I said during a phone call, where I hoped to convince Dorothy to reverse her decision voluntarily. "The funds are legally designated for my child's care and education, not for kitchen renovations or family vacations." Brooke, you're being overly emotional about this situation," Dorothy replied with the same condescending tone she had used at the baby shower. "Pregnancy hormones are making you irrational about money management. Once the baby arrives and you see how expensive parenthood really is, you'll appreciate that I've preserved these funds for when they're truly needed." The dismissal of my concerns as pregnancy hormones while she spent my child's education money on luxury cruises was both insulting and revealing about her complete lack of understanding regarding her legal responsibilities as a trustee. "Dorothy, I need you to understand that you violated your fiduciary duties by spending trust assets on personal expenses," I continued, drawing on my legal training to explain the seriousness of her actions. "Using my child's money for kitchen renovations and vacations constitutes breach of trust and possibly criminal theft." "Brooke, stop being so dramatic," Dorothy said with obvious irritation. "I've managed family finances longer than you've been alive. A few necessary improvements and a short vacation aren't going to hurt anyone, and there's still plenty of money left for actual baby emergencies." Have you ever tried to explain to someone that they were committing crimes against your child while they dismissed your concerns as emotional overreaction? That's exactly what I was experiencing as Dorothy refused to acknowledge the legal and ethical violations involved in spending my baby's trust fund on her personal luxuries. But what proved to be even more frustrating was discovering that other family members were supporting Dorothy's decision, treating her theft as responsible financial management, rather than recognizing it as exploitation of my child's designated resources. "Brooke, maybe your mother has a point about waiting to see what you actually need," my Aunt Patricia said during a family phone call discussing the shower incident. "First-time parents often go overboard with expensive baby products that aren't really necessary. Dorothy is just being practical about not wasting money on trendy items." The characterization of my child's educational opportunities and development resources as trendy items that weren't really necessary, while ignoring the fact that Dorothy had spent the money on kitchen countertops and cruise ship entertainment, was both logically absurd and morally offensive. "Besides," Patricia continued, "Dorothy has been managing family money for years, and she understands what constitutes appropriate spending better than someone who's never had significant financial responsibilities." The suggestion that I had never had significant financial responsibilities, while I worked as a paralegal specializing in family law and had been managing my own finances successfully for 8 years, was both factually incorrect and deliberately dismissive of my competence as an adult and expectant mother. But the most devastating family response came from my brother Michael, who had apparently been convinced that Dorothy's theft was actually protective financial planning that would benefit everyone in the long run. "Brooke, you need to trust Mom's judgment about this trust fund situation," Michael said during what I thought would be a supportive conversation. "She's not trying to hurt you or the baby. She's just being responsible about not letting new parents make expensive mistakes with money that needs to last for years." The reframing of Dorothy's theft as protective financial planning while she booked luxury vacations with my child's college money was so disconnected from reality that I realized my family had completely lost sight of basic ethical boundaries regarding children's designated resources. Michael, she spent $100,000 of the baby's money on kitchen renovations and cruise bookings, I replied, hoping that specific dollar amounts might help him understand the magnitude of what Dorothy had done. That money was specifically intended for your nephew's education and opportunities, not for Mom's home improvements and vacations. Brooke, you're obsessing over money when you should be focusing on preparing for motherhood, Michael responded with obvious frustration at my persistence. Mom will make sure the baby has what he needs when the time comes. Right now, you're just proving that you're too emotional to handle large amounts of money responsibly. The circular logic that my objections to Dorothy's theft proved I was too emotional to deserve access to my child's trust fund, while she used that same money for luxury purchases was so twisted that I realized rational discussion with my family was impossible. But while my relatives were defending Dorothy's crimes and treating me like I was being unreasonable for wanting my child to receive the education funding his great-grandmother had specifically provided, I was quietly working with trust attorneys who were horrified by the scope of Dorothy's violations and eager to help me recover every penny she had stolen. Ms. Williams, what your mother has done represents serious federal crimes involving trust fund theft and breach of fiduciary duty, Attorney Rebecca Chen explained during our initial consultation. The fact that she announced her intentions publicly while admitting to using trust assets for personal expenses provides excellent evidence for both criminal prosecution and civil recovery. The legal validation that Dorothy's actions were criminal rather than just poor family communication was both empowering and encouraging, since it confirmed that my child would be able to recover his stolen inheritance plus damages for the harm Dorothy's theft had caused to his future opportunities. We can pursue immediate injunctive relief to prevent further spending of trust assets, criminal charges for theft and fraud, and civil damages that will ensure your child receives not just the stolen money, but also compensation for the educational and developmental opportunities that were delayed by your mother's crimes, Rebecca continued. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of building the legal case was knowing that Dorothy's own public statements and documented spending patterns had created comprehensive evidence of her guilt that would be nearly impossible to deny or minimize during prosecution. As I prepared for the legal battle that would recover my child's stolen trust fund, while ensuring Dorothy faced serious consequences for her betrayal of her grandchild's future, I realized that her public theft at my baby shower had been the worst possible strategy for someone trying to hide financial crimes from a paralegal who specialized in family law and understood exactly how to prosecute trust fund violations. The woman who had stolen my baby's money while dismissing my concerns as pregnancy hormones was about to learn that maternal instinct includes the determination to protect children's futures from family members who would exploit them, regardless of their excuses or justifications. The systematic documentation of Dorothy's trust fund theft that I began building in the weeks following my baby shower created a comprehensive legal case that would ultimately expose not just her financial crimes, but also her complete disregard for her grandchild's future and her responsibilities as a trustee charged with protecting another generation's opportunities. Using my paralegal training and connections within the family law community, I began gathering evidence that included Dorothy's public admissions at the baby shower, documented spending on personal luxuries using trust assets, and recorded conversations where she continued to justify her theft while dismissing my child's educational needs as unnecessary expenses. Brooke, you need to stop obsessing over this money situation and focus on preparing for motherhood, Dorothy said during one recorded phone conversation where she continued to minimize her crimes while planning additional personal spending using my child's trust fund. I've decided to use some of the remaining funds to upgrade my master bedroom, since having a comfortable space for the baby's visits is important for family bonding. The casual announcement that she was planning to spend more of my child's education money on bedroom furniture while characterizing it as beneficial for her grandchild was both legally incriminating and morally bankrupt. But it was also perfect evidence of her continued intent to exploit trust assets for personal benefit. Dorothy, that money is legally designated for the baby's care and education, not for your home improvements, I replied, while carefully recording her response. You're violating your fiduciary duties as trustee by using trust assets for personal expenses. Brooke, I'm making practical family investments that will benefit everyone, including the baby. Dorothy responded with obvious irritation at my persistence. A nice guest room where you can stay with the baby is more useful than throwing money at expensive private schools that aren't even necessary. Have you ever recorded someone admitting that they were stealing your child's college fund to buy bedroom furniture while claiming it was more beneficial than education? That's exactly the kind of evidence I was gathering as Dorothy continued to incriminate herself while dismissing her grandchild's future opportunities as a wasteful spending. Besides, Dorothy continued during the same conversation, plenty of successful people attended public schools. Spending trust money on expensive private education is just showing off rather than building practical life skills. The recorded dismissal of educational opportunities while spending the designated education funds on luxury home improvements provided perfect evidence of Dorothy's breach of trust and her complete misunderstanding of her responsibilities as a fiduciary charged with protecting my child's interests. But what proved to be even more legally valuable was Dorothy's admission that she had been planning the theft long before my pregnancy, suggesting premeditated fraud rather than impulsive poor judgment that might have been treated more leniently by courts. I've been concerned for years about whether you would handle a large trust fund responsibly, Dorothy said during another recorded conversation. When your grandmother established this trust, I knew eventually I would need to protect the money from being wasted on unnecessary expenses by inexperienced parents. The admission that she had been planning to violate trust terms for years while serving as trustee demonstrated clear criminal intent and provided evidence that her theft wasn't a reaction to my pregnancy, but rather a premeditated scheme to redirect my child's inheritance for her own benefit. I started making necessary family improvements last year to ensure the money would be used productively rather than being frittered away on baby products and private school tuition that don't provide lasting value, Dorothy continued, apparently unaware that she was confessing to felony trust fraud while I documented every word. The comprehensive evidence I was gathering included not just Dorothy's recorded admissions, but also financial documentation of her personal spending using trust assets, witness statements from baby shower attendees who heard her public announcement, and expert testimony about trust law violations that would make her criminal prosecution virtually guaranteed. Ms. Williams, your mother's own statements provide overwhelming evidence of deliberate trust fund theft and breach of fiduciary duty, Prosecutor David Martinez explained as we prepared the criminal charges that would be filed. Her recorded admissions about premeditated theft and her documented personal spending using your child's trust assets constitute serious federal crimes. The federal government's interest in prosecuting Dorothy's crimes was both validating and empowering, confirming that her theft represented serious violations of laws designed to protect children's inherited assets from exploitation by trusted family members who abuse their fiduciary responsibilities. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the case development was learning that Dorothy's luxury spending patterns had created additional evidence of her crimes, since her renovations and travel purchases were all documented and could be traced directly to trust account withdrawals that violated her fiduciary duties. Every kitchen appliance, every piece of cruise ship entertainment, and every bedroom furniture purchase made with your child's trust money is evidence that will be presented during prosecution, my civil attorney Rebecca Chen explained as we prepared for both criminal and civil proceedings. The comprehensive approach to holding Dorothy accountable included not just recovery of stolen trust assets, but also punitive damages that would compensate my child for educational delays caused by her theft and ensure that she faced financial consequences that exceeded the immediate benefit of her crimes. We're seeking not just the return of stolen funds, but also damages for the educational opportunities your child has lost due to delayed access to trust assets, plus punitive awards that reflect the seriousness of stealing from children's designated inheritance, Rebecca continued. As my due date approached, and I prepared for both motherhood and the legal battle that would secure my child's financial future, I realized that Dorothy's public theft at my baby shower had created the perfect opportunity for justice by providing multiple witnesses to her crimes, while demonstrating her complete lack of remorse or understanding regarding her obligations to protect her grandchild's interests. The evidence we had gathered was so comprehensive and incriminating that Dorothy's conviction was virtually guaranteed. But more importantly, the legal case would ensure that my child received not just his stolen inheritance, but also additional compensation, that would provide even greater educational and developmental opportunities than my grandmother had originally envisioned. The strategic timing of Dorothy's arrest was carefully coordinated to occur during the cruise send-off party she had organized to celebrate the luxury vacation she was taking with money stolen from my child's trust fund, providing maximum dramatic impact while ensuring that dozens of witnesses would observe her being held accountable for her crimes against her grandchild's future. By the time the send-off party was scheduled, I had given birth to my beautiful son Thomas, and the fierce maternal protection I felt for my child had intensified my determination to ensure that Dorothy faced serious consequences for stealing from his educational opportunities while he was still in the womb. "Brooke, you really should come to Mom's send-off party," my brother Michael called to encourage my attendance at what he didn't realize would be Dorothy's arrest. "She's so excited about this cruise, and it would mean a lot to the family if you could put aside your concerns about the trust fund and celebrate with her." The suggestion that I should celebrate Dorothy's luxury vacation, funded by my infant son's stolen college money while putting aside concerns about her theft, was so absurd that it perfectly captured my family's complete moral bankruptcy regarding children's financial protection. "I'll definitely be there," I replied, knowing that this would be the most satisfying day of my new motherhood as I watched federal investigators expose Dorothy's crimes while she was surrounded by people who had been praising her smart financial management and responsible family leadership. The send-off party was held at a marina restaurant where Dorothy had arranged for 30 family members and friends to celebrate her departure on the luxury Caribbean cruise she had booked using Thomas's trust fund money. The elegant setting and celebratory atmosphere provided the perfect contrast for the dramatic reversal of fortune that was about to unfold. Dorothy deserves this vacation after all the stress of managing family finances and helping Brooke through her pregnancy, my Aunt Patricia was telling other guests as they toasted Dorothy's upcoming travel with champagne purchased using my son's educational inheritance. The praise for Dorothy's management of family finances while she was actually stealing from her 2-month-old grandson created exactly the kind of witness testimony that would be valuable during prosecution, since it demonstrated how she had manipulated family narratives to justify her crimes. At exactly 2 p.m., when Dorothy's celebration was at its peak, and all the invited guests were present to witness the occasion, FBI Special Agent Sarah Rodriguez and her team arrived with federal marshals and comprehensive arrest and asset recovery warrants that would end Dorothy's party and begin her journey through the criminal justice system. "Dorothy Williams, you are under arrest for trust fund theft, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to defraud a minor," Agent Rodriguez announced, as she placed handcuffs on Dorothy in front of her shocked party guests. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The silence that followed Dorothy's arrest was absolute and profound, as 30 people processed what they were witnessing. The woman whose financial responsibility they had been celebrating was being arrested for federal crimes involving theft from her infant grandson's educational trust fund. All assets purchased with stolen trust fund money are being seized by the federal government for recovery and restitution to the minor victim Thomas Williams, Agent Rodriguez announced as asset forfeiture specialists began documenting Dorothy's renovated kitchen, luxury travel bookings, and other purchases made with my son's money. The systematic seizure of Dorothy's ill-gotten luxuries was both thorough and satisfying, with federal agents photographing and cataloging every kitchen appliance, piece of furniture, and cruise deposit that had been purchased using money designated for my child's education and development. But the most meaningful moment came when I finally had the opportunity to address the assembled guests who had been celebrating Dorothy's theft while praising her as a responsible financial manager who was protecting family resources. 6 months ago, during my baby shower, Dorothy announced that she was stealing my son's $350,000 educational trust fund because new parents are too emotional to handle money responsibly, I announced to the stunned party guests who were now understanding the true source of Dorothy's luxury lifestyle. The comprehensive explanation of Dorothy's crimes was being delivered to an audience that included many of the same people who had defended her theft while criticizing me for being obsessed with money that belonged to my child. While I was preparing for motherhood, Dorothy was spending Thomas's college money on kitchen renovations and cruise bookings, claiming these were necessary family investments that would somehow benefit her grandson more than the education my grandmother had specifically provided for him, I continued. Have you ever had the opportunity to expose a criminal to the same people who had been praising their responsible financial management while they stole from your child? That's exactly what I experienced as Dorothy's guests learned the truth about how her celebration had been funded by theft from her infant grandson's educational inheritance. Every luxury appliance in her kitchen, every cruise ship entertainment package, and every piece of bedroom furniture she purchased came from money that was legally designated for Thomas's educational opportunities and developmental support, I concluded, finally able to share the truth that Dorothy had hidden behind false narratives about family financial protection. As federal agents continued processing the scene and Dorothy was transported to federal custody, I realized that this moment represented not just justice for her crimes, but also complete vindication of my determination to protect my son's future from family members who would exploit children's inherited resources for personal luxury. The woman who had publicly announced her theft of my baby's trust fund, while dismissing my concerns as pregnancy hormones, was finally facing consequences that reflected the magnitude of her betrayal of her grandchild's educational opportunities and financial security. The comprehensive resolution that followed Dorothy's dramatic arrest at her stolen money cruise party moved through federal court with remarkable efficiency, driven by overwhelming evidence of her crimes and her own recorded admissions about using my son's trust fund for personal luxuries while dismissing his educational needs as unnecessary expenses. Dorothy ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple federal felony charges including trust fund theft, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and defrauding a minor, receiving a sentence of 5 years in federal prison plus comprehensive restitution requirements that would ensure Thomas received not just his stolen inheritance, but also substantial damages for the harm her crimes had caused to his educational opportunities. The defendant systematically exploited her position as trustee to steal educational funds, specifically designated for her infant grandson, using the money for kitchen renovations and luxury travel, while dismissing the child's future needs as unnecessary expenses. Federal Judge Patricia Chen said during Dorothy's sentencing hearing, "This represents a particularly egregious case of family financial exploitation that targeted the most vulnerable victim imaginable. The judicial condemnation was both personally validating and legally significant, establishing important precedent for protecting children's inherited assets from family members who abuse their fiduciary responsibilities to facilitate personal theft and lifestyle improvements. But perhaps more importantly, the asset forfeiture and restitution process resulted in recovery of not just the $350,000 original trust fund amount, but an additional $200,000 in damages, penalties, and punitive awards that reflected the seriousness of stealing from children's designated educational resources. Thomas will receive comprehensive restitution that includes not just the stolen trust money, but also damages for educational delays and punitive awards that ensure his future opportunities exceed what your grandmother originally envisioned," Civil Attorney Rebecca Chen explained as we finalized the recovery process. The enhanced restitution meant that Thomas would have access to educational opportunities and developmental resources that surpassed even my grandmother's generous original planning, transforming Dorothy's theft into an even stronger foundation for his future success and achievement. Using the recovered trust funds exactly as my grandmother had intended, I established comprehensive educational accounts for Thomas, while also creating the Eleanor Williams Children's Trust Protection Foundation, which provides legal assistance to families whose children's inherited assets are threatened by exploitation from trusted relatives who abuse their fiduciary responsibilities. Dorothy's case demonstrates how family members can exploit their trusted positions to steal from children while justifying their crimes as responsible financial management, I testified, before a state legislative committee examining trust fund protection laws. Stronger oversight and criminal penalties could prevent similar thefts from devastating other children's educational opportunities. The legislative testimony was both personally meaningful and professionally important, allowing me to transform Dorothy's crimes into systemic changes that would protect other children from relatives who might view inherited assets as personal resources rather than respecting their designated purposes. Have you ever been able to use your family's crimes against your child to create legal protections that would help thousands of other children avoid similar exploitation? That's exactly what I experienced as Dorothy's theft became the foundation for stronger laws and enforcement mechanisms protecting children's inherited educational resources. The most personally satisfying development was watching Thomas thrive with the educational opportunities and developmental support that the recovered trust fund provided, demonstrating that my grandmother's generous planning had ultimately been successful, despite Dorothy's temporary theft of his inheritance. Thomas is already showing signs of exceptional intelligence and curiosity, his pediatrician told me during his 6-month checkup. The early childhood development programs and educational toys you're providing are clearly supporting his cognitive growth in remarkable ways. The knowledge that Thomas was receiving the developmental advantages my grandmother had envisioned, despite Dorothy's attempts to redirect his inheritance toward her personal luxuries, was both emotionally healing and practically encouraging about his future educational success. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of our recovery was the way Thomas's trust fund had been enhanced through Dorothy's criminal restitution, providing him with educational opportunities that exceeded even my grandmother's original generous vision for his future development. The enhanced trust fund will cover not just private school tuition and college expenses, but also graduate school, professional development, and entrepreneurial opportunities that will give Thomas advantages throughout his entire career. Financial advisor Maria Santos explained as we planned his long-term educational investments. 2 years after Dorothy's conviction for stealing Thomas's trust fund, I was invited to speak at the National Conference on Children's Financial Protection, sharing our story with legal professionals, social workers, and family advocates who work to prevent similar exploitation of children's inherited resources. My mother stole my son's educational trust fund to pay for kitchen renovations and luxury cruises, while claiming that babies don't need expensive things like private school education. I told the audience of child protection specialists. Her crimes weren't just financial theft. They were attacks on my son's future opportunities and my grandmother's legacy of generational wealth building. The presentation was both educational and cathartic, allowing me to honor my grandmother's memory while helping professionals understand the long-term impact of trust fund theft on children's educational and developmental outcomes. As I concluded my keynote with a comprehensive tribute to my grandmother's vision and Thomas's bright future, despite his great-grandmother's betrayal, I realized that Dorothy's crimes had ultimately led to outcomes that were more meaningful and impactful than simply preserving the original trust fund intact. The stolen educational money had been recovered with substantial enhancements. Dorothy's crimes had created stronger legal protections for other children's inherited assets, and our experience had established a foundation that would help families navigate trust fund exploitation and recovery. Most importantly, I had learned that maternal instinct includes not just protecting your child from immediate threats, but also ensuring that their future opportunities are preserved from family members who would steal from the next generation to fund their own immediate pleasures. If you're reading this and you have family members serving as trustees for your children's inherited assets, please know that there are legal protections and advocacy resources available to help you monitor their stewardship and hold them accountable if they abuse their fiduciary responsibilities. Sometimes the people who claim to be protecting your children's futures are actually the ones most willing to exploit those resources for personal benefit. But trust fund theft is a serious crime, and children deserve to receive the educational opportunities that previous generations worked to provide them. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had family members exploit your children's inherited resources? How did you handle situations where relatives treated your children's trust funds as family emergency funds? Your story might help someone else who's facing similar exploitation of their children's financial security. Thank you for joining me on this journey from pregnancy vulnerability through devastating betrayal to ultimate justice and enhanced educational opportunities for the next generation. Remember that protecting your children's inherited resources is worth fighting for, even when the theft comes from family members who should be safeguarding those opportunities instead of stealing them. See you in our next story here at Her Sweet Revenge.